In the previous Torah portions from Leviticus, we learned how God expected the people of Israel to be holy and how they were to approach Him. They could not approach God any way they wanted. They had to set themselves apart and perform specific rituals in order to approach Him and commune with Him in His presence. And if you'll recall, the text of Leviticus indicates that if an Israelite wanted to approach God and draw near to Him, they had to do so through an animal. That God instructed them, saying, "When any man of you brings an offering to the Lord, you shall bring your offering of animals from the herd or from the flock." But the Israelites could not bring absolutely any animal as an offering. And in chapter 11, in this week's Torah portion, Israel is instructed regarding which animals were allowed and not allowed to be brought to offer to the Lord. Apparently, there are holy animals and there are unholy animals. That is, there are animals that God has set apart to be consumed by Himself and His people, and there are animals that should not be on the menu for Himself and for His people. It says in Leviticus 11, "Speak to the sons of Israel, saying, These are the creatures which you may eat from all the animals that are on the earth." The text goes on to explain that when it comes to land animals, only those that have a split hoof and chews the cud are allowed to be eaten. For example, a cow has a split hoof and chews the cud, so it is considered kosher. The word kosher is Hebrew, and it simply means fit or proper. A kosher animal is fit and proper to be eaten by the people of Israel because God has given them commandments regarding which animals they are allowed and not allowed to eat. A pig, for example, is not kosher because while it has a split hoof, it does not chew the cud. And regarding animals like pigs, the text says, "You shall not eat of their flesh, nor touch their carcasses. They are unclean to you." For an Israelite, eating pig would not only be a sin because it would mean disobeying God's commandments, but it would also make them ritually unclean and they would be unable to worship God in His presence. The text of Leviticus 11 continues, and we are told about how the Israelites were not allowed to eat any kind of seafood unless it had fins and scales. And they were not allowed to eat any kind of scavenger birds, and they were not allowed to eat any kind of bugs except certain kinds of four-legged insects. So why does God want Israel to keep kosher? So that they would be holy from the rest of the world. It says at the end of the chapter, "For I am the Lord who brought you up from the land of Egypt to be your God. Thus you shall be holy, for I am holy." God had graciously brought Israel out of Egypt, so He now expected them to live a set-apart life according to His instructions. That the rest of the world eats whatever they like, but not God's people. God's people are supposed to be concerned with following God's instructions in every area of our lives. So in order to be faithful to God, Jewish people today should be keeping kosher. But what about Gentile Christians? Should we be following the instructions in Leviticus 11? It appears that the apostles believed we should be. In Acts 15, the apostles convened in Jerusalem to decide if it should be mandatory for Gentile believers to become converts to Judaism in order to be fully accepted as brothers and sisters in the family of God. And after much debate, the conclusion was that Gentiles do not have to become legally Jewish in order to be fully accepted by the rest of the believing Jewish community. However, there would no doubt still be concerns among many that accepting Gentiles among them would cause them to become ritually unclean and perhaps morally unclean. So the apostles gave the new Gentile believers 4 laws to follow that would allow them to more easily break away from paganism and then integrate themselves into the Jewish community. And 2 of these commandments specifically concern eating. The Gentiles were to abstain from what is strangled and from blood. And that which is strangled and blood is just another way of saying to avoid meat that had not been properly slaughtered. They were essentially prohibiting any meat that was not kosher. So it would seem that it was the apostles' intention for Gentiles to stay connected to the Jewish community, that if we were going to eat meat, that we would get it from the Jewish community. And this would serve at least 2 purposes. It would alleviate any concerns that the Jewish people might have that perhaps we Gentiles were still engaged in pagan sacrifices, but it would also allow us to be in constant contact with the Jewish community. But further than all of that, it makes sense for Gentile believers to at least keep kosher in this area, since that will be the norm in the kingdom. Speaking of those who will not be included in the kingdom, it says in Isaiah, "Those who eat swine's flesh, detestable things, and mice will come to an end altogether, declares the Lord." So we have to remember that in the kingdom, in Jerusalem, there will be a rebuilt temple, and all of the instructions associated will be reinstated. And as those who want to be able to dwell in Jerusalem and be with Jesus there, then we will have to live under a standard of holiness mapped out in Scripture. So as disciples of Jesus, it would make sense that we'd want to take on a higher level of holiness, a level of holiness that Jesus himself lived out.